Tossing the caber is among the oldest and most traditional of Scottish metaphors. In this event, Scotland, represented here by a big bloke in a kilt, tries to throw off English rule, played by a tree trunk. It's 3 centuries since the Scots lost their independence. Now it seems they want it back. Most Scots owe little to the Highland image which has launched 1,000 shortbread tins.
Those high tower blocks were built about 1970 to rehouse the people of Gorbals.
For a start, most of them live in big cities.
On the left, Buchanan Street, one of our major shopping areas. The dome at the bottom on the right marks Fraser's department store, the most beautiful traditional store in the city.
As a sporting nation, Scotland is famous for being fucking shite. But tonight, I'm pleased to welcome one of the foremost exponents of the growing art of Scottish karate, Bill McHavoc. Good evening, Bill.
All right, son.
Indeed. Now, Bill, Scottish karate, I understand that kicking is important.
That's right, son. Your Japanese karate goes way at the top with the kicking. It's far too high.
But it's not the idea to kick your opponent in the stomach.
Aye, but you're forgetting one of the fundamentals of Scottish combat. Only take on people who you know you can fucking beat. I would recommend small children, pets, and maybe even people that fell out their wheelchairs.
Excellent.
Brian Hennigan and Bill Dewar's Useless Guide to Scotland tells you everything you never needed to know.
I'm coming up to Scotland next month, and I wondered if I could take you out for a wee bit of lunch, the new.
In Scotland, mocking the English verges on obsession.
The English have discovered that through watching a combination of James Bond, Dad's Army and Star Trek, they can put together an authentic Scottish vocabulary.
Indeed, with just a few key phrases, it's possible to become a genuine Scottish person.
For example,
Okay.
oh yes, indeed.
The new.
No, indeed.
Ken.
No, indeed. Kenneth.
There've always been plenty of Scots who resented English rule, but this time it feels different, even to the Scots.
I think that in part of the problem has been in the past that wanting to be Scottish was seen as being synonymous with hating the English. And the point is that the whole thing has reached a maturity now where that aspect, this sort of dislike of the English, is still there in a sort of very humorous way, but that's not why we want to be separate. We wish to be separate and independent so that we can govern ourselves.
I don't have a problem with the English people. I have many, many English friends. I don't have a problem with the English people at all. I have a problem with the English government in the way they've ruled this country for, 300 years.
Scotland might not go its own way. There are big financial implications for a start, but that's not what concerns the Scots at present. To outsiders, the Scottish identity seems rooted in the past. I wonder if Scots feel the same way. And why are Scots from so many different backgrounds riding the independence train? The Isle of Skye, over the sea too, Bonnie Prince Charlie and all that. Dunvegan Castle on Skye is the ancestral seat of the MacLeods, and John MacLeod is the 29th clan chief.
Now be very careful on this roof. I'm always terrified of people falling over it.
It's a heritage which this one-time professional actor and singer traces back to the days when Norse raiders controlled the coast.
Well, I often relate to my Viking ancestors. I really do feel that.
These days, there's not a lot of call for pillaging, although, like his forebears, he has a full-time job keeping a roof on the castle.
As soon as I succeeded, and I had to, this roof had dry rot right through it. In 7 years of being put down, it was a new roof at the end of the 1950s, and I repaired it in 1966, 67.
The unvarnished history of the MacLeods includes its less principled side.
He was a very wicked man. I mean, he was known as the wicked man. Yeah. And he was a really wicked man.
Over the centuries, they've sided with the English, either when it suited them or because they had little choice. Soldiers of fortune, some. They helped build the British Empire.
And when his son, who's that chap over there, married, all the literature at the time said, what's that charming Miss Brodie doing, marrying that absolute... He's John MacLeod too.
This John McLeod plays occasional tour guide in his own castle, just to stop the thing falling into the sea.
It's the only castle in Scotland that's still got its family and its roof, ever since recorded time. Even though the roof is in bad state of repair, and so it's a family, but...
The fortunes of the McLeods have certainly waxed and waned over the generations of English rule.
Finance and economics is really what you actually find in this room, because 3 of my ancestors in this room have been completely ruined by the conditions of their life. The chief who was time at the 45, his grandson, and lastly my great-great-grandfather who was knocked out by the potato famine and left the castle in 1851, and it was 80 years before a chief was able to come back to live here. But that chief was my great-grandfather, and my grandmother was his daughter, and of course was accustomed to the fact that there was actually money. But she had had 40 years to spend it, and she did. Financially, of course, I was in a completely different situation to her. And on one side, I had a real financial problem, and on the other side, I had all the feelings which anybody might have about being invaded.
Which means turning your castle into one of Scotland's leading tourist attractions.
Was, what hours do we actually are opening in the winter? Because I've had somebody...
So why does this Eton-educated McLeod with his English accent believe in Scottish independence?
Yeah. It is a question of feeling, I think, more than anything else. And I feel myself to be Scottish to the extent that when I was a boy, even in the train, in the sleeper, I always knew when I crossed the border from England into Scotland or Scotland into England, I always felt that, and still do, that in England I am in a foreign country.
But what do people mean when they say they feel Scottish? And how do the Scots differ from anyone else?
The Scottish people differ from other species in one respect. While other nations might make love, enjoy sexual relations or commit bodily to one another,
Scottish people simply mate, often for life. Now this may, or it may not involve shagging.
there are 2 courtship procedures.
One short and one long.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the short courtship procedure. Hey doll, do you fancy a dance?
No, thanks.
You fucking whore.
And now the long courtship procedure.
Hey doll, do you fancy a dance?
No, thanks.
How no?
I'm out with my pals tonight.
You fucking lesbian.
I think that it's difficult to put a timescale on. I think that we'll probably be independent in the next 10 to 15 years. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but it will happen eventually.
I think in the 70s and 80s, devolution was being pushed along, and independence being pushed along by a select few. Now there's actually a general consensus among a wide spectrum of Scottish opinion that the time is right now, and it's simply a matter of it will come, not a matter of if, but when.
If there's to be a tartan revolution, there'll be no shortage of ammunition. Few countries can have done more to merchandise a national image.
This is Millennium. Millennium.
Long after the power of the Highland chiefs had been smashed, it was the weavers of the Scottish lowlands who helped create the tartan tradition we know today.
This was done for the Olympic Games in '96.
And they're still at it. There's even a Princess of Wales tartan. Of course, Scotsmen do wear kilts. You just have to know where to look. The Highland Games are a kilt spotter's dream.
This is my first time in Sutherland, sober.
Highland Games seem to be part sport, part vaudeville. These games were opened by a man who appears to be wearing the uniform of the 3rd Battalion, the Queen's own Highland ice cream salesman. The Highland Games are an extraordinary window into an age and way of life which has all but disappeared.
Throwing the big weight over the pole.
And Brian, do you know how that actually developed?
No, how did it happen, Bill?
Well, of course, in medieval times when Scotland was at war with England,
Yes.
they had to block up the doors in the houses.
Uh-huh.
You see, so there was no access from the ground. So
Of course.
the fish and chip meals that were brought back from the chip shops had
Yes.
to be thrown in through the upper windows.
Oh, I see.
And sometimes they were of considerable weight, and that's
Yes.
how they practiced.
And of course, that's why you need a big tosser in the family.
That's right, there's a few big tossers here today, isn't
That's
there?
right, indeed. This is the gathering of the biggest tossers in the Highlands. I think it's great. It's an invention, it's contrived, it's cheap, it's colourful, everything that Scottish people generally aren't.
and I think that it's fun to be at. I don't care whether it's made up or not.
And it's also part of a huge marketing campaign for us to sell loads and loads of tacky souvenirs to the tourists. From Australia, Canada, New Zealand, a lot. We've got them, hook, line and sinker.
My mum's pension depends on it.
Exactly. So let's keep up those stereotypes.
Yeah. Are we ready?
Yeah. Right.
And smiling.
It's true. The Scots do have an uphill battle countering stereotypes which are largely their own creation.
People are always wanting to think of you as a historical relic. So people are rather inclined. I often feel that when people expect to see me, they expect to see heather growing out of my ears and all sorts of very strange things, you know. And I don't feel at all like that. I feel very much part of this century going into the millennium and what is going to happen in the millennium as far as this place is concerned. It's going to stay alive. I mean, in legal terms, we own goodness knows how many acres. I mean, legally, I still own the Coolins. Legally, the mountain range. Legally, I still own the tables. Legally, I still own this land here. I mean, I own a certain considerable number of acres.
Don't own the seals, though.
No, I don't, but I own the land. They lie on.
If Scotland has been plagued by too many negative images in the past, what, I asked John McLeod, was so valuable about the clan tradition he believes in perpetuating?
I love it when I think that the people don't obey their political superiors. Or at least, you know, in the clan system, the chief was supposed to be able to guarantee his clan, but of course he never could.
So what is the essence of the clan tradition?
Well, I don't know what the essence is, except it always seems to me that I have great relationships with people who know what it is to live in a tribal environment.
A tribal environment. Perhaps that helps explain the kilt's universal appeal. Once outlawed by the English, these days the kilt is worn by wannabe Scots from Texas to Tokyo. There's clearly more to Scottish identity than a pile of pleated tartan. But why independence? Are the people who live on Scotland's run-down housing estates going to notice a difference if Scotland goes it alone?
Everything that's happened up till now has been a failure. Be it politics from whatever side of the track, be it Labour or Conservative. And I think that having our independence will in effect give people a good reason to think that their own people will take care of them more than in the past.
This is very, very far from London, and the English government don't really care about the people who live here and the problems that they're encountering on a day-to-day basis.
We are an independent-minded people, and we do not like interference from government at all. But if there's going to be any government, we'd much rather be governed, really, from Scotland than from Westminster. I do believe that's true.
Next year, Scots will get their own parliament with limited powers. Many believe that will kill off the independence movement. So far, it's simply sharpened appetites for a complete break.
For me, Scotland has always been and always will be a different country. A country that had a different language, different currency even, different legal system, a different educational system.
And different values. That's the important thing about our cultural identity. We have different values from England. And the common links that unite the different viewpoints of, say, the Scottish working class, Scottish middle class, Scottish upper class, are actually quite a strong link in terms of making us Scottish. There's much more uniting us than there is dividing us.
Many Scots have prospered through the 3 centuries of union with England. Now, as Scottish identity reasserts itself, there's a feeling that being tied to the English is holding Scotland back.
Scotland has never had any problems with Europe. The English, on the other hand, I think have genuinely had a problem and still do have a problem with people who are not themselves, who are Europeans. If there's one reason why I would be keen on Scottish independence, is because I want not to be represented in Europe by people who think like the English do.
Is the debate that's going on in Scotland at the moment about its future a sensible, level-headed sort of debate?
Insofar as Scots can be sensible and level-headed, I would say yes.
But when all's said and done, aren't the Scots just like the rest of us?
The Scottish character can be summed up in its whisky. The Highland is quite smooth, the Islay is quite rough and textured, and the Lowland is quite refined. And that together is the Scottish character.
But what one of these is mine, Brian?
No, you're missing the point, Bill. The Highland is smooth, the Islay is rough and textured, and the Lowland is quite refined.
Yeah, I don't really give a damn. What one is mine?
I'm wasting my time here.
Now it seems everyone from urban comedians to urbane chieftains wants the English off their backs.